and to help us continue to help you. So again, our training today is brought to you by our partners over at San Bernardino County. And today we are so happy to be joined by both Desiree Thomas, Business Services Technician, as well as Carmela Giliberto, Business Services Specialist, who are both here to share more about the resources available to employers like yourself. Good afternoon, ladies. How are you?
Hello, doing well. Thank you, Anna. And thank you everyone for joining us for another one of our monthly workshops brought to you by the always engaging speakers of the CEA. As you may have seen in our flyer, Workforce Development offers a wide range of services to support small businesses. We have 3 America Job Centers here in San Bernardino County, one in San Bernardino, another in Rancho Cucamonga, and then one in the high desert in Victorville. We also host multiple job fairs throughout the county, so if you have any hiring needs, just please let one of us know. One of our most popular service is the on-the-job training program. With the help of WIOA funding, we can assist businesses with their hiring needs by reimbursing 50% of wages paid for up to 3 months while training a new employee. If you're interested in taking advantage of this program, just please reach out to one of us. We'll love to help. And as you know, we host monthly business and HR workshops like the one you're attending today. So be sure to register early for our next month's session on wage and hour laws, happening on June 6th at 10 a.m. I will be putting the link in the chat box below. So just make sure you click on that and just get registered ahead of time. Next, Carmela, one of our wonderful business services specialists, she will walk you through some of the great opportunities and services we provide to help businesses grow. Thank you.
Thanks, Desiree. Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. As a business service specialist, I do work with business consultants who help businesses in need of funding for needed business improvements. Incumbent worker training, for example, social media marketing, leadership training, etc., all to help increase productivity and therefore prevent layoffs. We recently rolled out an exciting transitional job program. Think of this like a part-time paid internship where the county is the employer, and we will provide the business with candidates for your consideration for up to 320 hours. It's a win-win. So if you need additional help, let us know. We can give you some unemployed job seekers for consideration to help them gain work experience. Want to save money? Take advantage of our complimentary HR hotline, 1-877-282-3763. We also have an employer toolkit where you can have access to various resources as well as links to all our partners in San Bernardino County. So save our website, workforce.sbcounty.gov. Here you'll gain access to our calendar of future events such as these workshops. Interested in any of these services? I'll put our information in the chat. So reach out to us so we can set up an appointment to discuss them in further detail at your convenience. Thank you again so much for your time. Without further ado, I'll give you back to our beautiful Anna and our fabulous speaker, Juliana.
All right. Thank you, Carmela. Thank you, Desiree, and to everyone over at San Bernardino for all of the work and dedication that you pour into your employers in your area. So now I'd love to introduce our trainer today. We have Juliana Gabriel, our Senior HR Compliance Director. So you are in great hands. And Juliana, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Carmela and Desiree, and welcome to our San Bernardino County employers today. I'd like to introduce California Employers Association, or CEA, before we get started. We have long partnered with San Bernardino County Workforce Development Board. And when you're calling in on that HR hotline, you'll be speaking with myself or one of the HR advisors over at CEA. We are an HR consulting company, and we have members located throughout the state of California, even beyond California. And our focus is on providing you peace of mind with exceptional HR compliance solutions. So if you do find you need some additional support beyond that HR hotline, you can join us as a CEA member, and all of our members get access to our extensive library of HR forms and sample policies and toolkits that you can use in your day-to-day HR practice or as you run your business. We can also help you out with HR projects. So if you need a customized employee handbook, training, coaching, assistance with an investigation, you name it, we can help you out. So you can visit our website at employers.org. You're also welcome to call into us directly with any questions that you might have about that. Now, I do want to remind you that this presentation today is for educational purposes only and should not be relied upon as legal advice. CEA is not a law firm, and we are not giving you legal advice on these trainings or when you're calling in on that HR hotline. We're giving you education and resources. But that said, you are more than welcome to ask us general questions about the content today. As Anna mentioned, you can do that in the chat box. I'll be monitoring that chat box throughout. We want to make this practical and useful for you. So please do ask your questions or any clarification that you might need. All right, so let's talk about what is on our agenda today. We are focused all on artificial intelligence, or AI, which is really the term, I think, of the past year. We've just seen it everywhere in the news and the media. And so we're going to first focus on this new AI era, as it's been coined, that we are all living in and adjusting to, and how we help our staff really navigate that change. Because there's been a lot of rapid change. It's happening very quickly. And in a time of disruption and change, there's going to be uncertainty and concern. So we'll talk about some tips to help them out with that. We're also going to focus on your California compliance obligations. So what laws or regulations are on the books right now for employers if you're using AI to help you make your employment decisions. Then we're going to talk about potential pitfalls. If you're using AI in your business, what are some of the risk areas that you want to pay attention to, maybe train your staff on? So issues like confidentiality, right? What are you putting into that AI tool? Is it secure? Is it safe? What about misinformation and verifying our sources? AI being used to deceive, right? So we're going to talk about all those types of things, how you can mitigate some of those risks. And then we're going to round it out at the end and discuss how you can develop your AI handbook policy. So whether you already have one in your handbook or maybe you think it's a good idea to put one together, we really do recommend for most employers to now have a specific policy on the use of AI. Because if your employees have access to a computer, you might not realize that they're already using AI and, what are they putting into it, right? If you don't have any parameters around that, you're kind of leaving it up to them. So we'll talk about what provisions you want to have in an AI handbook policy. All right, so kicking it off with this new era of artificial intelligence, I first just want to start with some stats just to show just how quickly things are moving. And we are really living in this AI explosion, I think, within the past year or so. We've just seen it really take off. And this technology has actually been around for a little while now, but it's really become accessible to the masses. And so that's why it now feels like it's just everywhere, right? We can't stop hearing about it. So just to put this in perspective, it only took 5 days for ChatGPT, which is the most popular AI platform, to reach 1 million users. And ChatGPT currently holds about 80% of the market share, according to statistics. So they're really the big fish in this game. To compare, Facebook, we all know Facebook, right? Huge social media platform. When they took off, it took them 10 months to reach 1 million users. So the pace at which AI is being accessed and kind of, again, in the hands of everyday people is moving very quickly. There's currently over 1 billion people today who are actively using AI tools. And then this is an interesting statistic. So 95% of Americans are still using traditional search engines. So what that means is when they have to go look up an issue or research a question, they are still going to Google to do that, for example, as opposed, directly to ChatGPT. But what's happening now is 60% of those Google searches are ending without a click to a website, because as you may have all experienced, when you go and type in your question now, the AI answer pops up for you, right? And so people are getting the information that they need from the AI. They're relying on that for the most part, and they're moving on, as opposed to clicking a business's website or clicking an outside article to go verify that information, right? So it's fundamentally changing how we're accessing information, how we're verifying it, relying on it. Now, let's talk about how this is impacting businesses and HR professionals. So how are employers using AI today? There's a lot of different uses. Some of the ones that we're hearing the most from especially mid and larger size businesses is they're using AI to screen candidates. So the AI tool, for example, will filter through resumes and search for certain keywords or whatever's been put into that AI algorithm. And then that AI tool is helping select which candidates move forward. I've even heard of basically, AI robots interviewing candidates now. If you can imagine on a computer, you hear a voice, right? The AI is asking the questions, it's assessing the answers. And there's some risks when it comes to doing this, when it comes to removing humans outside of this process. And California has a particular concern with that we're going to talk about in a little bit. Some other uses. AI is really great at organizing, synthesizing information, coming up with lists. So HR professionals are turning to it to draft job descriptions, right? You might put in a few job duties or qualifications and ask the AI tool to spit it out for you. Generating policies, checklists, to-do lists, HR calendars, right? To help you keep track of projects, but also everyday uses as well, drafting communications, right? Everyday people are using it for that. So maybe you need to send out an all hands email to your staff, or maybe you're drafting a letter or a correspondence to your client. AI is really good at just within seconds, right? Coming up with a polished professional correspondence. We also kind of take out the human element, right? Maybe it's too polished, too perfect sometimes. So that's always the thing, is we're going to have to weigh with AI, right? How much do we want to use it? How much do we want to rely on it? Facilitating research and decision-making, and then also analyzing data across HR information systems. So again, it's really good at summarizing, aggregating data. So it can be used to spot trends, right? How many safety incidents did we have? Was it in a particular department? Are our leave of absence or attendance issues on the rise, right? So that AI may help you spot issues that you didn't see before. I also want to give you just a little overview of some of the most common AI tools that are being used, and with the disclaimer that I am not a technology expert, so I'm sure there's, many, many more out there, but I just did want to give you some of the basics for those of you who are new to this or kind of just exploring. So obviously, as I mentioned, ChatGPT is one of the big ones, and a lot of these have free versions, right, that anyone can go on and use, just like a search engine. Google Gemini is another big one. And people are mostly using these for conversational AI, for Q&A, research, creative writing. I heard some statistics that people are actually using it just for personal inquiries at night. Just they're interested in researching a topic or a personal issue, and they're kind of just talking back and forth with the AI tool. Claude is a big competitor of ChatGPT. It's getting a lot of attention lately. They're a little more focused on long form writing. They have what's known as a larger context window. So they might also be a little bit better at document analysis or sifting through, thousands and thousands of pages. There might be a slight edge there. Microsoft Copilot is AI built into Microsoft 365 tools or integrated into it, things like Office and Teams. It can automate tasks within those systems. So that's another thing that we're seeing, is that AI is starting to be integrated into other applications that we're already using. So you might think, oh, my employees aren't, using AI at our business, when in fact, there might be AI embedded into other tools and technologies that they're using. For your marketing team, Canva AI. So again, Canva is a platform to create things like design layout, social graphics, content creation. And so now there's that AI feature. So you have a little bit more creativity there, right? If you want to create a picture of your business and you want to put your logo on it and you want to, make it for your website or a brochure, it's a lot easier to do that with these types of AI technologies. OpenClaw, this one's an interesting one. So this is an autonomous AI agent that can actually execute tasks on your behalf. So it can send emails, it can enter information on an Excel spreadsheet, help you with your to-do list. But the catch is it has unfettered access to your systems. So it actually takes over everything on your laptop. You also have to be somewhat savvy to know how to direct the AI, but we're getting closer and closer to, shifting that work, right, to robots, and how much access do we want to give it? I obviously wouldn't recommend using OpenClaw on a work computer without authorization, because again, it's getting access to everything. There could be security concerns around that and around turning that much authority over to an AI tool. So now I'd like to check in with you all, now that we've kind of gone over that AI explosion and all of these changes, And I'd like to know, how are most people at your organization reacting to AI changes in your workplace or in the world? So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll and let me know which one best describes your business. And it is anonymous. So positive, most are excited about the new opportunities and efficiencies. Is it negative? People have maybe concerns about job displacement or meaningful work being taken away. Is it mixed? People are just all over the place. Or we really haven't had any discussions around it. You just have no clue where people are at with that. So I'm going to give you a few more seconds, and then I'm going to go ahead and end this poll and share. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share those results. So we're a little bit all over the board, although the highest category does seem to be positive, that most are excited about the new opportunities. Looks like another big category is mixed. Reactions are just kind of all over the place, or maybe you haven't had any discussions around it yet. And that's usually what we see in a time of great change or disruption, right? Everybody kind of reacts to it differently. And another thing is that people might not necessarily be speaking up at work if they have concerns about job displacement, right? They're not always going to vocalize that. And we have CEOs at some of these big AI companies that come out with these big projections about job displacement and job loss. So Anthropic's CEO predicted that 50% of white-collar entry-level jobs will be eliminated by AI. So Anthropic owns Claude that we talked about. And some are saying, well, they're just doing this because they want to increase their valuations and get more investment and more money, which might be true to a degree, right? But there also might be truth in that there's going to be some job displacement. So there's just a lot of uncertainty around this topic for everyone. And so we want to give you some tips on how you can address all of these changes with your staff, and just some tips for navigating change right now, especially if you are going to be implementing a new technology or new process or change the way you're doing things, right? People can sometimes be hesitant to that. Change can feel scary. So first is you're going to want to acknowledge concerns openly. So if you haven't done so already, especially if AI is impacting your business, you're going to want to address some of those fears or concerns. And you can start by validating them if they have expressed concern, right? I understand that these changes may feel overwhelming or unsettling, but I want to address your concerns directly. And then we really want to communicate transparently with our staff about what our goals are or how we see AI helping our workplace, helping us to be more efficient. And try to be specific as opposed to just big, broad statements like we're going to be more efficient, right? So try to say, our billing process has been tedious and very manual for years. We'd like to use AI to help make that a little more efficient and free you up for more creative or more strategic work like XYZ, right? Give them specific examples so they can start to see that vision of how their job might change, but maybe for the better, right? And not necessarily that they're going to be displaced. So if that's true, come out and say it. You don't need to make promises or guarantees, but you can say, this is what we really envision for how we're going to use this new technology. Now, if you are thinking that it might lead to displacement, right, and downsizing, which we have seen at a lot of these big tech companies, there have been massive layoffs that they are attributing to AI. At least that's what they're saying the reason is. We just saw a recent one with Meta. If that's the case for your business, consider, can you invest in training and upskilling for your employees, right? Maybe cross-department training, provide them pathways for new opportunities so that they see a path forward at your company or maybe eventually beyond your company, right? But it's going to buy that loyalty, that sense of hope and motivation to keep moving forward. Some other tips for you. Involve your staff and your employees in the decision-making processes as you start to implement these new technologies. Get their ideas, right? What are our pain points? Where do we want to make things more efficient? What issues are you running into? You're going to get a lot of great insight that way, but also it gives them a sense of control back over the situation, and it's going to help ease that concern and give buy-in when you do need to start implementing more change, right? So they're going to feel like, okay, I'm a part of this process and my opinion is being valued. And then finally, we're going to want to maintain ongoing communication about how these changes might be impacting our workplace or our customers, right? Or competition out there. It's not a one and done conversation, especially because AI is moving so rapidly. We're going to have to kind of continue to check in and see, are we being thoughtful with it? Do we need to revisit it from a, competitive standpoint? How is it being implemented here? Are we running into snags, right? So keep those conversations going. And you can do that on a, staff-wide level, or assign it out to different teams or departments, or even create a committee that just focuses on AI development and researching and staying on top of that. Some other tips for leading and fostering change and times of disruption. And this doesn't go just for AI, but even beyond that, maybe you're having to do a restructuring at your business. These can be some really great tips. So as we already talked about, you're going to want to involve, trust, and really empower your employees, right? Give them back some of that sense of control so that they feel valued and they feel like they, again, have a path forward. But another important part of this is prioritizing manager development, right? So your managers, a lot of the times, are the folks that your employees are going to be going to when they have questions or concerns or want some guidance. And so we want to make sure that our managers understand kind of our goals and visions, that they're able to communicate that confidently, clearly, and consistently, right? We want everybody saying the same thing, not sending a bunch of mixed signals. So we want to make sure that we're looping our managers in on those conversations and that we're training them on how to respond to some of these concerns. We also need to provide tools to navigate change, right? So if we are implementing a new technology or a new process, have you trained your employees on that? What is the saying? We have to hear something, 7 times before it really sticks, right? And so even if you provided a training, is there a standard operating procedure, an SOP on the new process that someone can go back to and refer to? Is there someone available for questions, right? Especially if you are really overhauling your technology or your processes. And then finally, number 4, and this one is probably one of the most difficult, we really want to create a culture of creativity and learning where people are open to progress, open to change. And that's really going to start with your leadership team. And you're going to want to lean on those people that their strength is in influencing, that they're good at building rapport, they're good at motivating your staff, right? They kind of need to be the spokes people of the changes that you are trying to make in your organization. All right, so with that, now that we've talked about kind of navigating all of that change, let's talk about our compliance obligations when it comes to using AI in the employment space. And right now, it really is an evolving legal and regulatory landscape. There's a lot that's being proposed in terms of new AI laws. There was a bill last year known as the No Robo-Bosses Bill, SB7, that was proposed, that basically if you were using AI to make employment decisions, you would have to give your employees a bunch of disclosures, and there were certain prohibitions on how you could use AI. It passed through the legislature, but it was actually ultimately vetoed by Governor Newsom with a concern that it was going to be too administratively burdensome for employers and kind of stifle that use of AI and new technology. While it didn't pass, they already have another version of it kind of ready to go for this next legislative session, along with a bunch of other AI bills. So you're really going to want to pay attention in the last quarter of the year when all of those new bills are being signed and announced, because I think we're going to see a ton more when it comes to AI for employers. But right now, we really just, for most employers, have one regulation from our California Civil Rights Department that was issued last year in October, and it has a pretty narrow focus. So what it's really focused on is they want to protect against employment discrimination when employers are using AI, algorithms, or what's known as an automated decision-making system. I'm going to define that in just a minute, an ADS, to make employment-related decisions, to screen resumes, to decide who to hire, who to fire, who to promote. They don't want you using AI and kind of turning a blind eye and letting it do its thing, and it ends up discriminating. So whether intentional or not, this new regulation clarifies if you use these AI tools, basically you're using them at your own risk. If they lead to discrimination, you will be responsible. You can be legally responsible for that. So this regulation protects both applicants and employees, but not independent contractors. So for example, let's say you're using one of those resume screening tools, and for whatever reason, it is filtering out women. It's just not selecting women to move forward. It's selecting men, and there's really no good reason or justification. It's not that the men are more qualified in that instance. You could be dealing with a gender discrimination lawsuit, even if you did not know that that's what the AI was doing. So again, it's all very new, and you're going to want to make sure that you have good processes in place, that you're auditing these systems. But let's break it down a little bit further and really just understand what this regulation means. So first, as I mentioned, it regulates an automated decision-making system, or an ADS, which is any computational process that makes a decision for you or facilitates a human decision, helps you make your decision by using AI, machine learning, statistics, or other data processing techniques to help inform an employment decision. Should I discipline that person? Should I hire that candidate, right? All of those types of things. So AI is just one type of an ADS. So ADS is kind of the large umbrella. AI is one of the things that would fall under it if you're using AI to make employment decisions. But another example could be, let's say you have a customer rating system where they can rate your employees, on their customer service, and they can give them, 3 out of 5 stars, 5 out of 5 stars. And then if your system ranks your employees, that would likely be an automated decision-making system if you then use that information to say, well, which person should we promote, right? Or should we discipline somebody because they're, they have low stars. So it's not just AI, it's any type of machine learning or statistics used for employment. All right, some other key highlights here. So as we already talked about, kind of, I think to nobody's surprise, the Civil Rights Department basically says our Fair Employment and Housing Act that protects against harassment and discrimination applies when employers are using these AI tools or automated decision-making systems to assist them in making employment-related decisions involving any of the following. The big one is hiring. I think that's honestly what prompted the regulations for the most part, is that employers are using these AI resume screening tools. But again, if you're using, the robot that's going to interview someone, same thing, you're using it to inform a hiring decision. Even if it's a human that ultimately chooses the candidate, right? You use that AI to help you. If you are using the AI to decide who to promote, right? So let's say you put everybody's performance reviews on your team into the AI tool, and you ask the AI tool, who should I promote, or who would you recommend that I promote to, supervisor, for example. If you're using it to decide who you are selecting for training programs or other opportunities, how to compensate someone, discharge. So should I terminate this person? Who in this group should I lay off, right? Or any other term or condition of employment. If that AI tool ends up having a discriminatory impact, that's where the issue is. You could be on the hook for that, right? If it discriminates based on any of our protected classes, right? That could be gender, race, based on a disability, age, etc. We have around 30 in California protected classes. Some other key highlights: you want to be really careful if you are using any sort of computer-based tests, quizzes, or games to assess candidates or employees. I usually see it to assess candidates, right? Where they have to complete some sort of quiz. Those tests have to be job related and consistent with business necessity. Otherwise, you're creating a risk there. So let me give you an example. Let's say you use some sort of computer test for your applicants, and one of the things it measures for the applicant is their reaction time, how quickly they answer those questions. If that's not really relevant to their job duties, right, on the job, it's not going to matter how quickly they can answer questions. And that ends up having a discriminatory impact, let's say, against certain people with disabilities, that maybe they can't respond as quickly, but they're qualified to do the job, but it eliminates them from the applicant pool for that reason. They could bring a discrimination claim, and then you as the employer have to show that that test was actually related to the job, which it's going to be hard to do on something like that. So we, in general, we don't tend to recommend these types of computer-based tests or assessments. We really recommend creating questions that focus on the job. If you want to ask hypothetical scenarios or how would you handle this situation, those can be really great to get insight to how they would perform on the job. rather than using these kind of, less than quality computer-based tests. Another thing that this regulation clarifies, I think, again, to nobody's surprise, is you cannot use AI tools to inquire into criminal history prior to extending a conditional employment offer. So that's already a law in California. If you have 5 or more employees, you cannot conduct a criminal background check or ask an applicant about their criminal history, subject to very limited exceptions, before you give them a conditional employment offer. And so this is basically just saying you can't use AI to get around that, right? You can't go over to ChatGPT and ask it to look up any sort of criminal history on your applicant before you've given them that conditional employment offer. So be careful with that. Another really key piece here is the record retention requirement. So if you use an AI tool to assist an employment-related decision, should I discipline this person? Can I terminate this person, right? You have to hold on to those records 4 years from the date you created them or the date you took the personnel action, the date you fired someone, the date you hired them, whichever comes later. So I think that's a risk area that a lot of employers aren't realizing yet. If they go to these, tools, ChatGPT, for example, and they're giving very specific employee information and scenarios, and they're using the AI to help them make their decision, you probably have to hold on to those records under this regulation. And if that person decides to sue you later, right, that could be used against you in a lawsuit. We're going to talk a little bit more about that kind of being a risk area later. So be aware of that. Come up with a policy at your company. Do you even want to use AI to make employment-related decisions or have it help you make employment-related decisions? Maybe at this point you don't, or if you do, you want to be very well informed on it. And I do see in the chat, we have a question here. They said, what Senate bill? I think they were referring to the one that did not pass that I mentioned. That one last year was SB7. It was known as the No Robo-Bosses bill. I forgot what the bill name is for the one that they're doing this year that they're trying to revive, but it is still proposed. So it has not passed at this point. We're still very early in the session. All right, so that leads us to this next question. If you are using these AI tools, these resume screening tools, for example, do you have to conduct anti-bias testing? Do you have to audit? Are you required to go back and see if they're having a discriminatory impact, if there's bias there, when you are using the AI tool to facilitate employment or personnel decisions? So our Civil Rights Department answered this. They did not provide an outright mandate. So it's not mandatory, but they get about just as close to a mandate as you can, because what they say is that it could be used as evidence in your favor or against you. So if you are conducting this anti-bias testing and someone brings a discrimination claim, it could be relevant as a defense of good faith, right? We audited the system and we didn't see any impact towards any particular group, right? But if you're not doing that anti-bias testing, it could be used against you if somebody brings a claim, right? They didn't look into it. That employer's using this tool and they have no idea what impact it's having. So obviously, we would recommend, if you are using these AI tools for employment-related decisions, hiring, firing, et cetera, that you do incorporate anti-bias testing. And also for some employers, they have AI vendors come in and create an internal AI that they're using, that's more secure, right? Because it's not a public tool like the free versions of ChatGPT, which is being saved on a third-party server, all of your searches, right? It's all internal. But still, even if it's internal, we want to understand how we're using it, what it's assessing about our employees or about our candidates. So make sure that you really press your vendors on what their guidelines are. What are those, resume screening tools looking for? What's in those algorithms? Are there any potential biases or issues that you see that could come up? So, what exactly is anti-bias testing? Unfortunately, the Civil Rights Department does not provide us specific examples, but kind of as I already alluded to, it would mean things like auditing your screening tool questions or your criteria on the front end to make sure that it's really job related, as we talked about, or also on the back end, ongoing monitoring and human review for impacts, right? So you have a human come in and see, okay, which resumes were removed? Was there a justification for that? Which kind of undoes the purpose of all of this, right? It's probably to save you time. But right now, that's kind of where we're at, that it's a sticky area. We would also recommend that you are working with legal counsel on this to audit those systems. There could be great advantages, I think, especially for larger employers where they're doing so much hiring, that they need this. But just make sure you're doing it in a well-informed way. And then just to give you an example of how this is already playing out in the real world, there's this Mobley versus Workday case. This is actually a federal case, so it doesn't have anything to do with our Civil Rights Department regulations. But what happened here, this plaintiff Mobley, he went on Workday's Workday's hiring platform. And he applied to a bunch of different jobs with different companies, over 100. And Workday has this AI hiring tool that it's using to assess candidates. And he's arguing he was rejected every single time, along with other job seekers who are over 40 years old, so that it's allegedly discriminating based on age, right? The AI tool is selecting out, filtering out those older workers. So he's arguing that Workday is responsible for violating the Age Discrimination and Employment Act. This lawsuit is also now a collective action lawsuit, meaning there are many, many plaintiffs involved, so obviously very high stakes. And it just provides some of the insight into the risks right now of using these AI tools in recruitment and making employment decisions. So even, on a federal level, a federal case, we're already seeing this play out. And then another compliance area that we want to also pay attention to, but I don't think it's receiving as much attention, is the Fair Credit Reporting Act and California's consumer protection laws. So I'll talk to you in a minute about how AI is playing a role here. But basically, this law, the FCRA, it's been around for a really long time. I think it's been around since 1970. And what it requires is anytime you obtain a consumer report from a third-party reporting agency on somebody's credit history or financial information, there's certain steps that need to be followed. And this is already limited when we're allowed to do this in California in the first place. We're not allowed to do like a credit history check on all of our employees or applicants. It has to be for specific jobs where they're more sensitive in nature. So there's specific categories that you're allowed to do this for example, if they have access to financial information or quantities of cash at your business, etc. But sometimes it does come up where an employer might do this. And so what the laws require is that consumer reporting agency and you, the employer, have to ensure that multiple detailed notices are sent to the person regarding what is being looked into or investigated. They also have to give their consent to do this, or stiff penalties apply. So recently, the Federal Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, this is the federal agency that enforces the FCRA, they issued guidance suggesting that the FCRA applies to third-party assessment tools used for hiring, such as these AI screening tools. So what does that mean for us as employers? What is the risk here? So once again, if we're using these AI tools and we have not checked with our vendor, for example, about how this AI tool works, what information it's collecting on that candidate, we might not realize that AI tool is conducting a criminal background check, or it's looking into financial history or credit history, and that it's then using that information to select whether somebody moves forward or not. So we may be risking also not only discrimination issues, but also an FCRA or California Consumer Protection lawsuit and penalties as well. So we're kind of in the wild, wild west here right now, right? When it comes to AI, the technology is still very new. We don't always know how it works. So be sure you really understand how the AI tool works. I really wouldn't recommend doing these types of searches on a publicly available AI tool like a ChatGPT, going over to the free version. If you do have a vendor that you're working with closely and you have an understanding of what information it's accessing, obviously that's a little bit safer, right? But make sure that you do really understand how their algorithm and their system works. All right, so we've gotten through the more difficult subject matter on our compliance section. So now we're going to get into a little bit more of the fun stuff on some of the potential pitfalls when you are using AI that we want to make sure our employees and our staff are aware of. So things like bias, confidentiality, misinformation, and how we can mitigate some of these risks as employers. as I already mentioned, we've already been discussing it, bias and discrimination, but I think it's worth kind of just diving into this just a little bit more. And it's important to understand how these AI tools really work. So at a very basic level, again, I am not a tech expert by any means, but these AI tools are what's known as a large language model that generate text based on what it has statistically seen in training. So it works off of patterns and probability, but they say that it cannot yet reason or problem solve. So the problem with that is who trained the AI, right? And what information did it rely on? Did it already have historical or societal biases that are already being used to train that AI, right? And so just like that can happen with humans, it's being perpetuated by these AI tools potentially, right? So worst case scenario, it might unintentionally lead to discrimination in employment decisions. But another thing that comes up, and I'm hearing a lot of frustration right now in the job market, I think it's, a competitive job market, maybe in general, but also people are saying, I'm just not getting an interview anymore. What is happening? And it might be some of these AI tools or these algorithms where if that person, that candidate is not checking all of the boxes, right, maybe they're being excluded. And so we may, without realizing it, we might be overlooking or excluding promising applicants, right? Whereas if a human did that interview, they looked at that resume, they might say, they don't fit all of the qualifications, but there's something really promising about them, or they have this other strength that we didn't even think we were looking for, but maybe we could use it in a different role, right? So some of those organic things that come up during the hiring and interview process might not come up as often, especially if we're using AI tools that have very strict algorithms and a bunch of requirements. We're wanting them to check every single box, right? Sometimes it's not just about checking all of the boxes. So how do we mitigate some of these concerns? We don't want to rely solely on AI for employment decisions, right? From a compliance standpoint, too, we want to make sure that we have some level of human review involved. So don't turn everything, our recommendation would be don't turn everything over to that AI tool and just kind of hope for the best, even though it's efficient, right? It might not always give you the best result. So also conduct anti-bias testing when possible, work with your legal counsel on that. And just in general, we recommend maintaining that level of oversight and control over those processes. All right, the next one, the next issue or potential pitfall is inaccurate information. So, and I'm sure all of us have come across this at one point. If you've used AI, right, you said, that's maybe not the best answer there, or maybe that's incomplete, right? So there is an issue that AI may generate incorrect or outdated information. I know when these tools were first kind of being launched, I remember like the legal or the laws were only through 2021 or something like that. So they've gotten better, that it's more up to date, but not perfect yet, right? And a bigger issue potentially is that AI may fabricate, meaning completely make up citations or facts. This is actually known as AI hallucination. And this has been an issue for lawyers in briefs where they've used AI to write their brief, and the AI has made completely fake cases, names, everything, citations that just don't exist. And lawyers have already been sanctioned for that. It's happened in California. So that's an issue, is if we're just relying on this, it might just completely make something up that just doesn't even exist. And my personal experience with it sometimes is that it seems to want to validate the user, right? If you say, I have this idea, right, it kind of encourages it. At least with ChatGPT, that's the one that I've kind of messed around with the most. Another big issue is it may be missing necessary context from the user, right? So if you ask it, let's say, an HR question or an employment question, but you're not clear that your employees are in a very particular industry or under a collective bargaining agreement, right? It might spit out this generic answer that's not relevant to you. It also doesn't know what it doesn't know, right? Information that isn't available on the internet or wasn't available in training, particularly soft skills, right? It can regurgitate some of that information, but again, it doesn't have the human experience. It also, at this point, cannot problem solve, so it doesn't have what's known as original creativity. So everything that it generates, it's pulling it from somewhere else, right? Based off of patterns and probability, and it's, smashing it all together, whereas a human can actually have an original, independent, creative thought. So mitigation, how do we deal with this if, let's say, our employees are using it for business, for research, to make decisions, not even having to do with, employment issues, but just in general, right? We want to make sure our staff is trained, that we want to treat our AI output or answers as a draft or a starting point, but that they have the ultimate responsibility to verify the information with reliable resources, right? That they need to go and check the citations. The AI often provides citations, right? Go and check them. Do they match? I can tell you many times for me, they do not match. The AI overstates the rule or, generalizes something. And so we want to make sure our employees understand you can't just rely on that. And then for issues that are significant, legal, financial, tax, right? We want to make sure that we are doing things the right way, that we have a subject matter expert involved, or at least reviewing that content. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but this is just an example. I had asked ChatGPT to give me examples of all of the incorrect information that it gave me, which was kind of fun because I had pushed back on the AI tool. So then it would say, okay, yes, this is overstated or it was inaccurate. So this is an example here. It said you asked what employers should do if they use an expired version of the Form I-9. And then it stated a quote from USCIS guidance, which is the best practice, the guidance that it gives here to complete a new Form I-9 and attach it to the original. But I was thinking, I've never seen that quote from the USCIS. Where did it pull that, right? And so I had asked it to show the document and page number, or take me to the website, right? And it could not locate the quote. So it said that means the statement I gave was not supported by a specific source, and the quote itself appears to have been fabricated or incorrectly generated. So that's just one small example of how these things can happen, and they can look very convincing. All right, the next risk area here is misuse and deception. And I think this is a big one that we want to make sure that we are training our employees, that not only other employees, but also third-party scammers may use AI to create misleading or deceptive communications, right? We've all seen those emails come in and they want you to purchase a gift card and it looks like it's coming from the CEO, right? And these types of scams, usually you can kind of spot them out, but they're going to be able to get more sophisticated with AI. So we're going to want to put systems in place and train our employees. You need to call me for an issue. If anybody's asking for money or your bank account information, whatever it is, payroll, right? Call me. AI can generate, fake photographs, videos, voices, and documents known as deep fakes. So that's a big concern, right? Those have been used to try to scam people, where it sounds like their grandkid is calling them on the phone. It sounds like their voice and that they're in distress and you need to send money, right? So we just want to make sure that we're well informed on this. We're also already seeing AI being used in harassment instances or to cause reputational harm. So there was this case last year, Carranza versus City of LA, where this LAPD captain alleged that someone had generated a fake nude photograph of her and circulated it around the department. And the employer didn't really do much about it. They didn't let everyone know that it wasn't a real photo. And so she actually ended up with a $4 million jury verdict. So that's just kind of an example of how we might start to see AI being used even in, instances of harassment in the workplace. So how do we mitigate some of these risks? We would recommend you establish a clear workplace AI use policy and train your employees on it. We'll talk about that more in just a minute. And then if AI is being used to generate, company communications, external communications, things on your website, make sure, again, that you do have a human review process for that. And then finally, confidentiality and privacy. So we may not realize, and our employees may not realize, that they could be compromising confidential employee and customer data, trade secrets, if they go and put that into a public tool like ChatGPT, for example, right? We'd like to think that that's secure, but that information does get stored on third-party systems. We don't know if that may be breached at some point, right? And so we want to be clear with our employees about what information is allowed to go into these tools. We're already seeing cases where information used or search histories are being used in lawsuits or criminal investigations. And there was a case, US versus Hepner case, where a client after speaking with his attorney, went and asked, I believe it was ChatGPT, what it thought of the legal strategy for the case. Well, guess what? The government was able to access that history and they were able to use it in the case, and the court found no attorney-client privilege applied. You shared it with a third party. This tool is not your attorney, so we can use it as evidence against you. So never input confidential or sensitive information into public AI tools, and make sure you do address confidentiality and permitted and restricted uses in your handbook policies, and then also train employees on safe use. Make sure that they are aware of some of those concerns. All right, so with that now, let's talk about what you should be putting into your AI policy in your handbook. And this is the last poll that we have for you here. We'd like to hear from you. Again, it's anonymous. Do you have an AI policy in your employee handbook right now? So yes, no, or we are currently working on it. Let me know where you're all at with that, and then we'll share the results just to kind of see where employers are on that. Thank you. I see all of your responses coming in. Going to go ahead and end poll and share those results. So it looks like about 80% do not have an AI policy. So the vast majority. So if that's you, you're not alone. Look, there's all these other employers that don't have one. 4% do, and then 17% we are working on it, right? So this is, again, it's brand new. It kind of really just exploded last year. So that is of no surprise to me, but we would recommend it for most work environments. Maybe the one exception would be if they just really don't have access to a computer, where they would never be looking something up. But outside of that, I really would recommend including one. So what are some of the key components that you would want in your AI policy? So first, just defining what is AI, and you might have a definition of an automated decision-making system if you want to, but I would just make it clear with some specific examples. I would just call them out, right? Copilot, ChatGPT, Claude, so employees know what you are talking about. Really important, and you're going to have to give this some thought for your business. What is allowed? So what are permitted, and then what are restricted business uses? So you may say you can use it for research, you can use it for creative writing, coming up with agendas, but maybe you don't want your team using it to create contracts in the sales department, right? You want that to be vetted by your legal department. So be thoughtful. The more specific examples that you give, the less guesswork that you leave for your employees to come up with their own idea of what it should be used for or not, right? Who is allowed? Maybe you don't authorize all of your employees to use AI. Maybe, you're more cautious, and so you only give specific authorization, or maybe everybody's allowed to use it as long as it's within certain parameters. What can't go in? So I would define sensitive personnel and customer data, trade secrets, business documents, anything that you would not want to get leaked to the world, I would define in that policy. Work product, we want to ensure quality and accuracy of our work. So remind your employees that they are ultimately responsible for verifying their information and sources, that they should not rely on the AI without verification. All right, just a few others here. Some other helpful provisions. I would probably want just a catch-all in there that these AI tools cannot be used for harassment, deception, fraud, etc. That's probably already covered really in your other policies, but I don't think it hurts to restate it. If that issue comes up, it'll be very clear. It's a policy violation. Privacy and property rights. So just as they generate other work for you that's company property, if they use an AI tool to generate work, you probably want to let them know that if it's used for business purposes, what is generated is company property. And also, if they're using their company email addresses, let's say you've given them a business account, for example, reserve the company's right to monitor AI systems, so that you have the right to go in and see what information is being shared, what is, the search history in there. And then I also think it's a really good idea to have an equal employment opportunity statement, especially if you're thinking you're going to use AI tools for any sort of employment related decision. You're committed to not using AI in a discriminatory manner. And for CEA members, we do have a customizable AI policy that covers these sections available under our HR forms if you do need that. All right, so closing question, if you do want to share it in the chat today, what is one step you're prepared to start taking this week when it comes to AI usage? So are you going to get on working on an AI handbook policy? Are you going to research? Are you going to audit your systems to make sure that they're compliant? Let me know in the chat. It's always fun to hear from each other. But with that, we will start wrapping up here. I don't see any outstanding questions in the chat box. All right. So I want to thank San Bernardino Workforce Development Board again for sponsoring this event today. I don't know if you all have any closing questions before I turn it over to, or closing statements, I should say, before I turn it over to Anna to close us out. Oh, and thank you. Rosemary said that she's going to work on her AI policy. And Kiana said, definitely implementing some new rules. I'm happy to hear that was useful for you.
100%. I love those action items always at the end. So I did drop a couple of things into the chat as we all kind of wrap up here. Scrolling up just a tiny bit, you'll see them. One is, as Desiree put in the chat at the beginning of the hour, I did want to remind everyone, if you have not registered for that 2026 wage and hour update webinar, again, compliments of our partners over at San Bernardino, that's happening on June 16th. So make sure, sorry for my typo, it is 2026. I wanted to just enter that. I promise we are not talking about wage and hour from the dark ages. That'll be 2026 wage and hour update. But that is compliments again of San Bernardino County. And then right under that, you'll see the link for the survey that I mentioned. So the way that we can best help you continue to serve your departments and your organizations is by hearing directly from you. So there is the link there. Juliana also flipped it to show that QR code if you prefer to do that. But I think that wraps us up. I don't see any other. If you are not able to download the PDF from the chat, we will be pulling the attendee list, and everyone that attended live will make sure that we get that over to you. So look for an email from either CEA or from the San Bernardino team shortly. We'll make sure that we get the content over to you because I know it's a lot of wonderful information that Juliana shared with us. So thank you again, Juliana, for sharing all your time and expertise with us. Thank you all for taking time out of the middle of your busy day for training with us. And if you are joining us for continuing education credits, thank you, Gigi, for reminding me. I almost let them go without it. But here is your HRCI code, 742496. SHRM code is 26-S6NTX. CEAinfo@employers.org if you need some guidance on what to do with those codes. You can also call that complimentary HR hotline from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday Pacific. So we look forward to seeing you all in June for that wage and hour update webinar, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you again, Desiree. Thank you again, Carmela, and we'll see you soon. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Good job.